The train whistle sliced through the dusty afternoon air as Lillian Vance clutched her threadbare carpet bag with trembling fingers, watching the conductor's face harden from disinterest to contempt. It was 1878, and the Arizona Territory had little patience for a widow with nothing to her name but a handful of coins and a letter promising work that now seemed as worthless as fool's gold. "Madam, I've told you twice now," the conductor said, his mustache twitching with irritation. "This ain't a charity station. Without proper fare to Tucson, you cannot board. That letter don't mean nothing to the railroad company." Lillian swallowed the lump in her throat. 6 months a widow, and the world had shown her nothing but its harsh edges. Her late husband Thomas had left her with debts instead of dollars, forcing her to sell their small Missouri farm for a pittance. The teaching position in Tucson had been her last hope. "Please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can pay once I reach Tucson." "The school has promised rules are rules," he cut her off, turning to the next passenger with practiced indifference. The midday sun beat down mercilessly as passengers filed past her. Some averted their eyes, others stared with a mixture of pity and relief that her misfortune wasn't theirs. Lillian stepped away from the line, pride keeping her spine straight despite the weight crushing her chest. 26 years old and nowhere to go in a town where she knew not a soul. "You folks get a move on now. Train leaves in 5 minutes." The conductor called out, deliberately avoiding her gaze. The platform had nearly emptied when the sound of hoofbeats cut through the station's bustle. Lillian turned to see a tall man astride a chestnut quarter horse trotting toward the platform. He dismounted with the easy grace of someone who'd spent more time in a saddle than on solid ground. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see the weathered lines around his eyes that spoke of years under the harsh western sun. Dust coated his leather vest and denims, evidence of hard riding. He couldn't have been more than 30, though life clearly hadn't been gentle with him either. He approached with purposeful strides, spurs jingling with each step. As he drew closer, Lillian was struck by the intensity of his blue eyes, searching the platform until they landed on her. A flicker of recognition crossed his features, though she was certain they'd never met. "Mrs. Vance?" he asked, his voice deep but unexpectedly gentle. Lillian tensed. "How do you know my name?" A small smile played at the corner of his mouth as he removed his hat, revealing sandy brown hair in need of a proper cut. "Preston Locke," he introduced himself with a slight bow. "I've been waiting for you." Lillian took an instinctive step back. "I don't understand." "How could you possibly be waiting for me when I don't even know you?" The train whistle blew again, signaling the final boarding call. "Madam, I work for Mrs. Eleanor Hawkins. She runs the school in Whispering Pines," he explained. "When she received your letter about the Tucson position falling through, she sent me to intercept you. She's offering you a teaching position in our town instead." Lillian's mind reeled. "But I never sent any letter about Tucson. I only just learned telegraph," Preston corrected. "From the Tucson School Board to Mrs. Hawkins. Small towns talk, especially when they're competing for educated women to teach their young ones." The conductor shouted the final call. Lillian glanced at the train, then back to this mysterious cowboy with his unexpected offer. "Whispering Pines?" She asked cautiously. "I've never heard of it." 3 days' ride northwest, Preston said, gesturing toward the rolling hills beyond the town. "Small but growing. 15 children in need of proper schooling. And how do I know this isn't some manner of trickery?" Lillian challenged, though something in his earnest expression made her want to trust him. Preston reached into his vest pocket and produced an envelope. "Mrs. Hawkins' letter of employment. $20 a month plus room and board at her boarding house." Lillian opened the envelope with shaking fingers, scanning the neat handwriting that outlined exactly what Preston had said. It was dated 2 weeks prior, which aligned with when she'd written to the Tucson school. "I don't understand why she would offer this to a stranger," Lillian said. "Good teachers are rare in these parts," Preston replied simply. "And Mrs. Hawkins believes in giving chances to those who need them most." The train's wheels began to turn, slowly pulling away from the station. With it went her failed plan, leaving only this unexpected alternative. "I have a wagon prepared," Preston continued, nodding toward the end of the platform. "It's not the most comfortable journey, but it's honest work waiting at the end." Lillian studied his face, searching for any sign of deception. All she found was patient expectation, and something else, a kindness that had become unfamiliar to her in recent months. "Why did they really send you, Mr. Locke?" she asked directly. His expression softened. "Because I'm the only one with business in Cedar Springs who could make the detour to meet your train." He hesitated before adding, "And perhaps because I volunteered." The surprising admission hung between them as Lillian weighed her limited options. Stay in a town where she knew no one, with barely enough money for a night's lodging, or trust this stranger's offer of legitimate work. "Very well, Mr. Locke," she finally said. "It seems Whispering Pines is my destination after all." Relief visibly washed over his features. "You won't regret it, Mrs. Vance." As Preston led her toward his wagon, Lillian couldn't help but wonder if she was making the wisest choice or the most foolish one of her life. Either way, something told her that meeting this cowboy would change her path in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The wagon wasn't much to look at, weathered wood with a canvas cover, but Preston had clearly prepared for her arrival. A small cushion rested on the seat, and in the back, she glimpsed provisions for several days' journey. "Allow me," he said, taking her carpet bag and securing it in the wagon. He offered his hand to help her climb onto the seat, and Lillian felt a strange flutter when their hands touched. As they left Cedar Springs behind, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the landscape. Preston handled the team of horses with confident ease, occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing brief stories about the territory. His manner was respectful but warm, nothing like the gruff cowboys she'd encountered at stations along her journey west. "How long have you been in Whispering Pines, Mr. Locke?" Lillian asked as they followed a winding trail through scrubland dotted with juniper and sage. "Going on 5 years now," he replied. "Came west after the war looking for something quieter than Tennessee." "You fought in the war?" she asked carefully, aware of how divisive the subject remained. Preston nodded once. "Union side. Lost my brother at Shiloh." He said it matter-of-factly, but Lillian detected the old pain beneath his words. "I'm sorry," she offered. "My husband, Thomas. He came back, but never really returned, if you understand my meaning." Preston's gaze met hers briefly, understanding passing between them. "Some wounds don't heal visible like," he said quietly. As the sun began to set, Preston guided the wagon off the trail toward a small clearing sheltered by cottonwoods beside a narrow creek. "We'll make camp here for the night," he explained. "There's a proper way station about 20 miles ahead, but we won't reach it before dark." Lillian felt a flicker of unease at the prospect of camping alone with a man she'd just met, no matter how gentlemanly he seemed. Reading her expression, Preston added, "I'll sleep under the wagon, madam. You'll have the wagon bed to yourself, with all the privacy the canvas cover can provide." True to his word, Preston maintained a respectful distance as he efficiently set up their camp. He built a small fire, prepared a simple but hearty meal of beans, jerky, and coffee, then arranged blankets inside the wagon for her. As they sat by the fire eating their supper, Lillian found herself studying him when he wasn't looking. There was a quiet confidence about Preston Locke that she found reassuring, a man comfortable with silence, unlike so many who felt compelled to fill it with empty words. "Tell me about Whispering Pines," she requested. "What kind of place is it?" Preston took a sip of coffee before answering. "It started as a mining town about 15 years back, but the silver played out quick. Those who stayed found other ways to make a living, ranching mostly, some farming in the valley. About 60 families now, spreading out from the town center. Got a general store, blacksmith, small church, saloon of course. And the children I'll be teaching, good kids mostly. Range from 6 to 16. Current schoolhouse is just a converted barn, but there's talk of building a proper one come spring." His expression grew animated as he continued. "Mrs. Hawkins has been teaching them basics, but she's got the boarding house to run too. The town's been saving for a dedicated teacher going on 2 years now." "They must value education," Lillian observed. "More than most frontier towns," Preston agreed. "Lots of the parents never had much schooling themselves, want better for their children." As the fire burned down to embers, Preston excused himself to tend to the horses while Lillian prepared for sleep. True to his word, he laid his bedroll beneath the wagon, tipping his hat in a gentlemanly good night before settling in. Lying in the wagon, listening to the night sounds of the territory, coyotes calling in the distance, the soft nickering of horses, the whisper of wind through cottonwood leaves, Lillian felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. The journey to Whispering Pines continued for 2 more days, following meandering trails through increasingly rugged country. Preston proved to be both an attentive guide and a surprisingly thoughtful companion. He pointed out native plants and their uses, shared stories of the territory's history, and gradually revealed more about himself in response to Lillian's careful questions. She learned he ran a modest cattle operation just outside town, that he served as an informal deputy when the circuit lawman was elsewhere, and that he had a passion for books that surprised her given his frontier occupation. By the time they crested the final ridge overlooking Whispering Pines on the afternoon of the 3rd day, Lillian realized she'd grown comfortable in Preston's company. The town below was smaller than she'd imagined, a collection of wooden buildings straddling a creek in a valley cradled by pine-covered hills. "It's not much to look at," Preston said, a note of affection in his voice, "but it's home." As they drove down the main street, townsfolk paused in their activities to observe the newcomer. Preston acknowledged greetings with nods and occasional introductions, though Lillian quickly lost track of names. They stopped before a 2-story clapboard building with a wide porch and neatly painted sign: Hawkins Boarding House. Before Preston could help her down, the front door swung open to reveal a stout woman with silver-streaked dark hair pinned in a practical bun. Her face creased into a warm smile as she bustled down the steps. "You must be Mrs. Vance," she called out. "I'm Eleanor Hawkins. Welcome to Whispering Pines." Lillian found herself enveloped in a surprisingly strong embrace almost before her feet touched the ground. When Mrs. Hawkins released her, the older woman turned to Preston with a knowing look. "Right on time, Mr. Locke. I trust the journey was uneventful, as peaceful as could be hoped for, madam," he replied, touching the brim of his hat respectfully. Mrs. Hawkins turned back to Lillian. "You must be exhausted, dear. Come inside, I've prepared the corner room for you. Best light in the house for reading." As Preston unloaded her bag, Lillian noticed the careful way Mrs. Hawkins watched their interaction. There was something almost calculating in the older woman's expression that made Lillian wonder exactly why Preston had been chosen as her escort. "Will you stay for supper, Mr. Locke?" Mrs. Hawkins asked. "Thank you, madam, But I should see to my ranch, he declined, though his eyes lingered on Lillian. Perhaps Mrs. Vance would like to see the schoolhouse tomorrow. I could stop by mid-morning if that's convenient. Before Lillian could respond, Mrs. Hawkins answered, "Excellent idea. She'll be ready at 10. As Preston mounted his horse, he tipped his hat to Lillian. "Until tomorrow, Mrs. Vance." Watching him ride away, Lillian felt an unexpected pang of loss. After 3 days in his constant company, his absence left a strange emptiness. "He's a good man, Mrs. Hawkins said quietly beside her. "One of the best in these parts. You seem to have a high opinion of Mr. Locke," Lillian observed. Mrs. Hawkins' eyes twinkled. "I've known Preston since he first rode into town 5 years ago." Not many men would have volunteered for a 6-day round trip just to escort a schoolteacher they'd never met. The implication wasn't lost on Lillian, but she chose not to acknowledge it. "I'm grateful for the position, Mrs. Hawkins. It was most unexpected." "Providence works in mysterious ways," the older woman replied with a satisfied smile. "Now come inside and tell me all about yourself over tea. We have much to discuss before you meet your pupils next week." That evening, after a hearty supper with Mrs. Hawkins and the boarding house's 3 other residents, an elderly storekeeper, a young telegrapher, and a middle-aged seamstress, Lillian retired to her room with a curious mixture of exhaustion and anticipation. The room was simple but comfortable, with a single bed, a small writing desk beneath the window, a washstand, and a narrow wardrobe. Mrs. Hawkins had placed a small vase of wildflowers on the windowsill, a thoughtful touch that brought unexpected tears to Lillian's eyes. As she unpacked her meager belongings, Lillian's thoughts kept returning to Preston Locke. There was something compelling about him that went beyond his handsome features or kind manner. Perhaps it was the hint of shared understanding. They had both been shaped by loss, though in different ways. Morning came with the scent of coffee and baking bread. After breakfast, Mrs. Hawkins insisted on helping Lillian select one of her 2 dresses for the schoolhouse visit. "The blue brings out your eyes," the older woman advised, brushing Lillian's chestnut hair with firm strokes before helping her pin it in a neat chignon. "Mrs. Hawkins," Lillian began hesitantly, "may I ask you something directly?" "Of course, dear." "Did you truly need a teacher so urgently that you would send Mr. Locke all that way to find me? Or was there another purpose to his errand?" Mrs. Hawkins' hands stilled for a moment before resuming their work. "Both can be true at once," she replied carefully. "We desperately need a proper teacher, but I've also watched Preston these past years, building his ranch, helping his neighbors, becoming respected in this community." She met Lillian's eyes in the mirror. What he lacks is someone to share it with, someone who might understand him. Lillian felt her cheeks warm. "Mrs. Hawkins, I've only just arrived. I'm here to teach, not to—" "Of course, dear," the older woman interrupted smoothly. "I'm merely explaining why, of all the capable men in Whispering Pines, I chose Preston for this particular errand." She patted Lillian's shoulder. "What comes of it, if anything, is entirely your affair." Before Lillian could formulate a response, a knock at the front door announced Preston's arrival. The schoolhouse was indeed a converted barn, though efforts had been made to transform it into a learning environment. Rows of mismatched benches faced a small teacher's desk. A blackboard hung on the far wall, and shelves along the sides held a modest collection of books and supplies. "It's not what you're accustomed to, I expect," Preston said as Lillian examined the space. "Actually, the school where I taught in Missouri wasn't much different," she replied, running her fingers along the desk's surface. "Though we had proper desks for the children. The town council has approved funds for furniture," Preston explained. "Just waiting on delivery from Denver. Should arrive before winter." As they discussed the practicalities of the position, Lillian found herself growing increasingly comfortable with the prospect of teaching here. The challenges were familiar ones, and the community's commitment to education was evident in the resources they'd already assembled. "Mrs. Hawkins mentioned you've been reading to the children in the meantime," Lillian said. "What books have they enjoyed?" Preston's expression brightened. "Cooper's Leatherstocking Tales for the older boys, Aesop's Fables for the younger ones. Started Dickens' Oliver Twist last month, but—" He shrugged self-consciously. "I'm no trained reader." "Yet you volunteered," Lillian observed. "Books were my escape after the war," he admitted quietly. Seemed right to share that with the young ones. There was something so genuine in his expression that Lillian felt a sudden warmth spread through her chest. This man, who appeared every inch the rugged cowboy, harbored a love of literature that matched her own. After the schoolhouse, Preston showed her the rest of the small town, the general store where supplies for the school could be obtained, the church that doubled as a meeting hall, and finally, to her surprise, his modest ranch on the town's outskirts. "I thought you might like to see where your milk and eggs will come from," he explained as they approached a neat cabin with a barn and corral behind it. "I supply the boarding house and several families in town." The ranch was small but well-maintained, a testament to Preston's industriousness. A few dozen cattle grazed in nearby pastures, chickens scratched in a fenced yard, and a vegetable garden flourished beside the cabin. "You manage all this yourself?" Lillian asked, impressed. "Mostly. Hire help for roundup and branding." Preston hesitated before adding, "Built it thinking someday it might be more than just my place." He didn't elaborate, but the implication hung in the air between them. As they sat on his porch drinking lemonade, Lillian found herself sharing more about her life than she had intended: her childhood in Pennsylvania, her brief marriage to Thomas, the struggles after his death. "He came back from the war changed," she explained quietly. "The drinking got worse each year. When pneumonia took him last winter, the doctor said his body was too weakened to fight it." She stared into her glass. "I mourned the man I married, but in truth, he'd been gone for years." Preston's hand moved as if to cover hers before he thought better of it. "War breaks something in a man," he said. "Some heal, some don't, some never get the chance to try." "Is that why you came west? To heal?" His eyes met hers. "Partly. Needed space to figure out who I was supposed to be now that the fighting was done." He gestured to the land around them. "Found my answer here." The sun was beginning its westward descent when they returned to the boarding house. As Preston helped her down from the wagon, their hands lingered together a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for today," Lillian said. "I feel much better prepared for Monday now." "The children will be lucky to have you," he replied. Then, with uncharacteristic hesitation, he added, "Mrs. Hawkins hosts Sunday dinner after church. I usually attend. Perhaps you join us." "I'd like that," she answered, surprised by how much she meant it. The first weeks in Whispering Pines passed in a blur of activity as Lillian established her teaching routine. The 15 students ranged widely in both age and ability, requiring creative approaches to ensure each child received appropriate instruction. Despite the challenges, Lillian found herself thoroughly enjoying the work. Preston became a regular visitor to the schoolhouse, often arriving at day's end with an offering fresh apples from his trees, a new book for the school's collection, or once, a set of hand-carved alphabet blocks for the youngest pupils. "You don't need to bring gifts each time," Lillian told him one afternoon as they walked back to town together. "Not gifts," he corrected with a smile. "Investments in our town's future." "Our town," she echoed, realizing she had indeed begun to think of Whispering Pines as home. As autumn painted the surrounding hills in fiery colors, Lillian and Preston's friendship deepened. Sunday dinners at Mrs. Hawkins' table became a cherished ritual, often extending into evening conversations on the porch. Townspeople began to exchange knowing glances when they were seen together, but neither acknowledged the growing speculation. On a crisp October afternoon, Preston invited Lillian to ride with him to a nearby ridge that offered spectacular views of the valley in its autumn glory. Mrs. Hawkins practically pushed her out the door, insisting the fresh air would do her good after a week confined to the schoolhouse. The hillside blazed with gold and crimson as Preston helped Lillian dismount at the overlook. Below them, whispering pines nestled in the valley like a toy village, smoke rising from chimneys in the late afternoon light. "It's beautiful," Lillian breathed, drawing her shawl closer against the cooling air. "It is," Preston agreed, though when she turned, she found him looking at her rather than the view. Something shifted between them in that moment, an unspoken acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing since that first meeting at the train station. "Preston," she began hesitantly, "I've been meaning to ask you something." "Anything," he replied. "That day at the station, you said you volunteered to come for me." "Why?" He considered her question, his expression thoughtful. "Truth is, when Mrs. Hawkins read your letter aloud at the town council meeting, something about your words caught my attention. The dignity in them, despite your circumstances." He paused. "I recognized something in your spirit that reminded me of why I came west, to start fresh on my own terms." "That's quite an impression to make through a letter," she said softly. "Some connections don't need much explanation," he replied, his voice equally quiet. "They just are." The moment stretched between them, filled with possibility. Then, with careful deliberation, Preston stepped closer and raised his hand to her cheek. "Lillian," he said, using her given name for the first time, "I know it hasn't been long, but I find myself thinking about you even when we're apart. If that's unwelcome, just say the word and I'll never mention it again." Instead of answering, Lillian closed the distance between them, placing her hand over his heart. She felt its strong, steady beat quicken beneath her palm. "Not unwelcome," she whispered. "Quite the opposite." When his lips met hers, gentle and questioning at first, then with growing certainty, Lillian felt as though pieces of her life that had been scattered by grief were finally beginning to reassemble into something new and hopeful. As winter descended on whispering pines, bringing snow to the surrounding hills and frost patterns to the schoolhouse windows, Lillian and Preston's courtship became the town's favorite topic of conversation. Mrs. Hawkins could barely contain her satisfaction, though she pretended innocence whenever Lillian gave her knowing looks. Preston began joining Lillian after school 3 days a week, helping the older boys with practical mathematics by measuring lumber for schoolhouse improvements, or assisting with a geography lesson by sharing stories of places he'd seen during the war. On Christmas Eve, the entire town gathered in the church for carols and celebration. As Lillian stood beside Preston, singing Silent Night by candlelight, she realized how completely her life had transformed in just a few months. The desperate widow rejected at a distant train station seemed like someone from another lifetime. After the service, Preston asked her to walk with him despite the cold. Snow crunched beneath their boots as they made their way to the schoolhouse, which glowed with lantern light from within. "I thought the school was closed for the holiday," Lillian said, puzzled. "It is," Preston replied with a mysterious smile. "I asked to borrow the key." Inside, Lillian gasped. The simple room had been transformed. Evergreen boughs decorated the windows, red berries brightened the teacher's desk, and a small Christmas tree stood in the corner, adorned with paper stars she recognized as her students' handiwork. "When did you do all this?" she asked, turning in wonder. "Had some help from the older children yesterday," Preston admitted. "Wanted it to be special." "It's perfect," she whispered. Preston took both her hands in his. "Lillian, these past months have been the happiest of my life. You've brought light back into my world in ways I never expected." Her heart quickened as he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box. "I'm not a wealthy man," he continued, his voice husky with emotion. "But everything I have, my ranch, my heart, my future, I want to share with you." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small pearl. "This was my mother's," he explained. "She made me promise I'd only give it to someone truly special." Tears blurred Lillian's vision as Preston knelt before her. "Lillian Vance, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation, her voice breaking with joy. "Yes, Preston, I will." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to gather her in his arms, Lillian thought of that desperate day at the train station. How close she had come to a completely different path. How a stranger's words, "I've been waiting for you," had changed everything. They were married on New Year's Day, 1879, in the church overflowing with well-wishers. Mrs. Hawkins wept openly, claiming credit as matchmaker to anyone who would listen. Lillian's students formed an honor guard of sorts, showering the couple with dried flower petals as they emerged into the winter sunshine. The schoolhouse remained Lillian's domain, though she now returned each evening to the ranch she shared with Preston. Together they expanded the garden, added rooms to the cabin, and created a home filled with books, music, and laughter. Spring brought news of their first child, due to arrive before winter returned to the valley. As Lillian stood on their porch one evening, Preston's arms wrapped protectively around her slightly rounded middle, she marveled at how thoroughly her life had transformed. "What are you thinking about?" Preston asked, his chin resting on her shoulder. "About waiting," she replied. "About how sometimes the things we think are setbacks are actually setting us on the right path." She turned in his arms to face him. "You said you'd been waiting for me that day at the station. How could you have known?" Preston tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his expression thoughtful. "I didn't know it would be you specifically," he admitted, "but I knew I was waiting for something, for my life to truly begin." He placed his hand gently over where their child grew. "Turns out I was waiting for this for us all along." As twilight deepened over whispering pines, Lillian stood wrapped in her husband's embrace, grateful for the cruel rejection that had led to this unexpected happiness. Sometimes, she reflected, life's greatest blessings arrive precisely when all hope seems lost, in the form of a cowboy riding up to say, "I've been waiting for you."